woman's shelter would be impacted by this particular. So it just like blows your mind. Same thing with Front Funder. It's like you get these questions asked by regular people who have a vested interest in supporting your dream, but also using your service in general. And how you view that product through that lens is been exceptionally eye-opening.
Hey, Matt, welcome back. We got another repeat guest, guys. Matthew from Neuvote. You were episode 7, bro. Now you're episode 112.
It feels like forever ago, but wasn't that long.
Yeah, like you're right there from the beginning. That was probably our third time recording, and we're doing batches. And since then we kept in touch, and you've seen some great growth with Neuvote. And right now, Neuvote is growing, getting a lot of attention. That's why I wanted to bring you on and talk about it, because you guys are getting a lot of buzz, but you're also experiencing a lot of growth, and it's all because of the turbulent time we live in, right? It's really become a catalyst for you in your industry.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that that's what kind of spurred the growth for this particular sector, but I'm really I'm happy to be able to provide a needed service during this time. But again, right, it's unfortunate the circumstances surrounding it, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're in one of those unique circumstances. Like, there's a few very particular niche industries where before COVID, before the pandemic, there was no real change happening there. It's very glacial movements, right? Everyone's kind of exploring it little by little, and then suddenly COVID, the pandemic was called. Everything was kind of shifted, and in that shift, it just highlighted all these weak cracks in our infrastructure, right? And it's really expedited the need for the growth. So elections technology, right? Let's talk a little bit about that and the state we're in right now, right? So with elections and with the pandemic happening, obviously one of the biggest problems is that we can't have people come to the polls, right? We need to encourage some kind of like virtual or even online kind of voting environment. But more than that, this is kind of like a statesman dream. Like, people always talk about, like, we live in this democracy, but we're not directly involved in our democracy. If we can vote more often and more frequently and in a more secure way, that also changes kind of our behavior, how we can interact with our government, and how the government can get permissions from us to do certain bigger, more bolder visions, right? So we talked about this off air, but while we're catching up, about the idea of like civic action and how voting technology can inspire more direct access for citizens, right? So let's start right from there, right? So what's the state of voting right now in the context of the pandemic? What are the challenges being faced?
Yeah. Before I jump too far ahead, the point you made about the more furthering the engagement aspect with an online system, it's funny you mentioned that, because pre-COVID, there were two countries that were really leading the way significantly with online voting, and that was Estonia, which is classic. Everyone knows the Estonia story. It's they do everything online. They're like the future, the Star Trek of civic. I guess digitization of democratic and governmental institutions. But the other country was Switzerland, funny enough. And the reason why Switzerland became sort of like this leader was they do a sort of a pseudo-direct democracy themselves. So Switzerland is cantons. They're all sort of independent, but they have a federation at the top of it. And they essentially vote 4 times a year. So it's not just every 4 years. They have elected officials, but they actually vote on policy 4 times a year. So pre-online voting, they would simply mail out ballots or have people go in and vote. But of course, 4 times a year, that's arduous. It's very cumbersome. So they decided to kind of migrate to an online system, and they've been doing it on and off for about 12 years in a pseudo sort of way. And then right before 2019, they were actually gearing up to do a completely federated top-down approach where everyone could vote online as long as you passed a number of criteria. And unfortunately, the company that they selected to provide the service didn't meet the criteria, so they had to kind of pull back and revive what their strategy was. But the point you made about increasing engagement and sort of being able to apply this pseudo-direct democracy aspect to voting, that's kind of where Switzerland was headed. Now, in our context in North America, it doesn't really apply. I think we're far, years and years away from that particular
Yeah.
thing, I guess would be a good way to put it. But yeah, like when COVID hit, we understood like right before COVID hit, we were expecting this to be about a 10-year go to market, very slow, gradual increase in adoption rate, and then kind of gearing up to do some significant milestones over that time. But we were prepared to go the long road. COVID
Mm.
hit, and I'll tell you, man, like March, it was just the craziest month of my entire life because there was so many elections coming up, not just in the US but globally. And all of a sudden people are like, what are we going to do? It literally was like pulling the rug from underneath these election officials and saying like, okay, here, you can't have in-person voting, which has been the de facto status quo for so long. What are you going to do now? And I can't say exactly who was contacting us, but we had contact, like we were getting emails and phone calls from like the weirdest places imaginable
Mm.
asking, hey, we're just looking at what our options are and what's available out there. Like, can you send us some information? And we were just, like you said, right? It really highlighted the infrastructure deficits that were present in the election systems. So
Mm.
now, during the last year, we've seen significant change in this industry. The US pulled their entire election together with vote by mail.
Mm.
There was issues with it for sure, but it still was like the biggest paradigm shift in elections that we've seen in hundreds of years. And now that cooler heads are sort of prevailing and they're trying to figure out what to do next, we are seeing a huge increase in people inquiring about online voting. Like, if this is going to be implemented, what are we going to do? And this whole industry has just become like, I want to say rapid moving, but it's like daily shifts. And that's not an understatement. I'm talking like quite literally every day I wake up and it's like, what else is going on? It's just insane what's happening to this industry right now.
Hmm. So, I mean, that's a lot of the things moving around, right? Like,
Mm,
when we first talked, when you came on air, you talked about this like being a dream and like how like everything is like it's like there's so many players doing systemic kind of moves to like open people up and show the kind of like the what's capable, what we're able to do right now
hmm
in this field. But since then, right? A lot of growth, a lot of movements. I do want to go back to this, right? Like with the state of elections and civic engagement more than
hmm
ever. Like Twitter recently announced that it's gonna. Jack Dorsey announced that Twitter is gonna become decentralized, the
mm,
management of Twitter. So I mean, ever since like a sitting U.S. president has been been banned from platforms,
hmm
like these large platforms are now looking at, oh damn, how can we remove the onus of us
hmm
on police in the digital space because it's too much liability. Like
hmm
entire government leaders is now involved,
hmm
right? So the idea of some kind of tool that's like co-signed by government, right? That can be utilized for citizens to like be involved, where like advisory councils can be, where like we can digitize kind of our institutions that already exist, but in a more
hmm
transparent and more ethereal way, with more engagement and more ideas being processed.
hmm
I think it's really important. Like sci-fi back in like the 80s and 60s, right? They always talked about humans like they had these idea of social networks, but in a more governmental way,
hmm
right? Like the GovNet or like these like networks that's like where citizens can connect and talk about it. If you look at like old school ways of thinking about the internet was grown, it was always thought about as a citizen tool, right?
hmm
Something that you interface with like larger political society and rest of the world. But nowadays, it's mostly been fixated on on entertainment
hmm
and infotainment, right? So this idea of using the technologies has been grown by this use case, entertainment, infotainment, and creating content, right, into something that can be used more for like actual politicization, like uplifting and changing how nations are run, and how citizens are involved with that. I think that's a big idea in itself, right?
hmm
Because technology as like especially the internet is naturally decentralizing things. It's giving it allows people to do more with less, right?
hmm
So what happens to societies when the citizens are given more control, right?
hmm
I think that's one of the most interesting things to think about moving forward, right? With COVID and with all the pandemic responses, we now are much more aware of what government's doing, You know,
Mm.
like more people are following, the news and what's going on from government, right? And saying what's actual movements happening. So I think this is going to breed a generation of people who's going to be want to be more involved with what the governments are doing, and being
Mm.
involved in the process of making solutions and improving the where their surroundings and their societies that they find themselves in.
Mm. It's interesting that you brought that point up, because if you think about like engagement in general, well, on the social networks,
Mm.
people are more engaged than ever before on like Facebook or Twitter or something, in politics in general. But voting, voting is historically kind of seen as the most active form of political engagement, where that's where people will typically connect with their government, especially, like how many people voted in the last U.S. election, like what was it, like 150 million people or something, almost half the U.S. population.
Hmm.
Huge numbers. And that was still low turnout compared to the overall eligible voters. And so when you have this internet connectivity that's increasing on the social channels, what happens when that actually moves over to online, right? And it's like it's not necessarily a partisan thing where different groups are predominantly active on the internet. It's almost unilateral. We
Hmm.
saw this with social networks when Obama ran, and he leveraged social media to his advantage quite significantly. But then the Trump came in and leveraged it even better, and that's where like a lot of like his absence from Twitter almost has left like a void, because it's so much more quiet now. So I find that really interesting. And the question that I have is like, if online voting, and this has always been the theory with it, is when it's rolled out, what's going to happen? Is it going to
Hmm.
increase overall voter turnout? There's all these hypotheses, but nothing's been really proven, because it's never been done to any significant level before.
Mm.
But it's like, when it's rolled out, what happens to the citizens? Does it become so easy that everyone is able to connect and vote a little bit better? Or do we see sort of like the typical people who are already engaged simply having an ease of access point?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's really interesting. I've had some really deep conversations about this with different stakeholders, and one person said, "Oh, more younger people are going to vote. That's what's going to happen." And I said, "Look, I've seen the numbers myself. Like I've seen the actual numbers in places where online voting has been rolled out, and it's typically the older people, the same people that will be going into a polling location, are the same people that are coming into the online services as well. It's
Mm.
just it's just the way things are. But again, then you see other examples where maybe there's an uptick, or percentage of single digit percentage increase or something like that. But the reality is we've never rolled it out en masse before, where we've actually been able to test and get verifiable data about what the result of this will eventually be. So it's interesting.
Yeah, yeah. So that's really cool because like you've clearly thought a lot about this, about like how technology shifts people and how this technology could shift people, right? So just continuing on that concept, what does an ideal world look like where voting and civic engagement is involved? Because like I said, like olden day novels or olden day like ideas about the future of technology and where that leads us as a society,
Mm,
you know, was a very utopian way of thinking, like of average people being more involved with everything. Right? We're become more
mm,
evolved, more smarter, and more socially conscious. Right? That
mm,
technology would evolve us with this. But we're all we all like we often are found ourselves to be like technology can sometimes reveals the worst amongst us, the worst of our our natures, right? So let's we talked about like civic engagement and a toolkit that can better interact allow citizens to like interface with their government,
mm.
right? What would like a positive feature look like with this?
It's a really good question. Since it's timely, I'll bring this point up. The GameStop stock fiasco, I guess you'd call it, right? That
Mm.
happened recently. People were trying to figure out why. Why did this? What caused this thing? What was the big movement behind it? And somebody said, all the thought leaders, Mark Cuban, et cetera, have kind of jumped in and said, this is an industry that's typically existed in the shadows, the finance industry, where it's been very difficult to understand, and it kind of just moves in the background and no one really understands it. But due to the internet, due to the information disclosure that's now out there, and the access to that information, people now are, much more educated and much more engaged in general, which led to people identifying those trends, which led to people, coming in and shorting the stock, or not shorting the stock, but essentially, what's the right term? Bear market. They were bearish on the stock, which increased the price, and we all know what happened. So when you have like this ideal, like what's going to happen when people are more engaged, when it's easier to get engaged in general, when it's no longer, something that just kind of happens in the peripheral, like town hall meetings, for example. Have you ever been to one in the city, in any city you've ever lived in? You ever been to a town hall meeting
I've been to one.
in your entire life?
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's my point, right?
Yeah.
Most people would say no, right? Or maybe one or two or something. The percentage of people that actually go to those things, where we're talking about their community, where they live, that has a direct impact on their day to day. It's something most people aren't even aware that this even happens. But there are measures being voted on. There policies being enacted right down the street from them, and they're not even aware of it until they read it maybe in the newspaper, or not anymore, the whatever Facebook post or something like that gets linked, like, hey, did you find out your city did this? It's interesting that this may be the beginning of a further engagement with the different jurisdictions and their constituents, where all of a sudden it's a dialogue is going to emerge where people start caring a little bit more about their community, what they're doing, how those representatives are interacting with them and governing. So I think this is, it could potentially be like the democratization of, I guess, voting in itself. It's a kind of a weird concept to think about, but it's the numbers are at a municipal level. It's a little bit different at the federal one, but at the municipal level, the people who actually go out to vote, if you hit 30%, that is seen as a huge number. So just to think about that, in your community, most communities, only 30% of people in that community are deciding on like which path that community takes. So what happens when those numbers come up to 60, 70%, 80% or something? What does a community look like where more members of that community are actually taking part in the overall democracy process?
Yeah. Like I think yeah, like it's digitized in the old school, like how things used to be, right? I think the main reason why most people don't show up at their town halls is because most of us don't even know our neighbors.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
You don't feel like you're part of a community. So it's not like, like a community is meeting together to decide the fate of the community. It's more like somebody's deciding this. I'm just somebody who exists. I have a network that's like spread out, but like I am just subjected to the rules of this area. And some mysterious force is putting it up, and somebody else is enforcing it. And I could be a victim of it, or I can be in the gray zone, right? A lot of people live in that gray zone, right? I think one of the interesting concepts is that when you live in a nation like Canada, there's actually two Canadas. One is a story of Canada, like what we all think is as a nation, like what are the ideals that we all believe is a nation, the colors, the anthem, all that stuff, right? Stories that we tell ourselves. Then the two is the legal Canada, right? The legal framework that operates the laws and conditions where we can interact, and the framework where commerce and everything kind of moves within it. It's actually two different things. So I think a lot of things happen when those two different types of those two types of nations kind of diverge. When the story of a nation changes from the legal nation, that's when like large discrepancies happen in these groups, right? Sorry, in like revolutions or like rapid changes can happen. But in our stake, right? Everyone loves the idea of the nation, the stories that we tell ourselves, but are almost like purposely left unaware of the legal framework, how it actually operates. Right? And I think that's the disconnect here, right? So for the average person, they need to be understood what civic engagement is. For that, they need to understand civics. Right? Like what is the government? What is the mechanisms? How does that affect me? How can I get involved? Right? How do I be involved? And then the reason why to be involved. That their voice matters and they can affect change, right? So I think that's what digital can particularly do. by making it easier to reach people and easier to contact them, and especially now with like kids being, education being changed, I think that we have an opportunity now to develop more responsive and more active communities.
I've thought about that, about like an education play with civics or something, and kind of tying it into what we're doing. It's
Yeah.
sort of like the first project that I rolled out in 2015, which was sort of like an education type application.
Hmm.
Here's how elections work. Here's to understand what happens in them. Um, that's an interesting angle to take. I don't have a clear answer for that one, because it's like it's a bit different from the focus that I've been working on right now, but.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think historically they've always said education is, goes hand in hand with a an educated voter is the ideal voter, because they
Mm.
understand what they're voting on, right? And a lot of the fear with increase in voting turnout is what happens when you give people who aren't necessarily completely up to speed about what the choices they make and how they have that effect. Brexit's a good example of that, right? Um, Brexit was a very, I think it's in hindsight, it's seen as a very reactionary vote referendum on a policy that had huge ramifications, that may not necessarily have the best outcome. And I've, anecdotally, I've heard a lot of people feel cheated by the result of Brexit, because it doesn't necessarily reflect what they were told was going to happen.
Hmm.
It's they a particular political stance said one thing and promised all, one thing, and they just the voters weren't aware of what that was going to mean. It's the same thing in where I live. I'll use anecdotally like Kitchener as an example. I found this, I was a little bit shocked by this, but going back to those numbers and meetings, 30%, 20%, those are the numbers that dictate the
Mm.
municipal community. Kitchener doesn't have fluoride in its water. They've
Hmm.
defluorinated the water. Now, I went back, and when I found this out, I was kind of shocked, and I read it was like some weird vote. Like I think it was like 15% people voted on this particular issue. The ramifications for defluorinating your water are everyone gets issues with their teeth.
Mm.
You have to compensate now, because it's like scientifically it's proven that it's like fluorinating the water doesn't have necessarily long-term health effects, but it does protect your teeth over time. And communities that remove that from the water supply suffer these health effects,
Mm.
like bad teeth, cavities, all this other stuff. And it was my son. He got a cavity or something, and like he was getting cavities, and I was like what's going on here? Isn't it like he brushes, but like why is it picking up in him anyway? Um, and it just kind of shows you that that particular policy, like a group of people felt really passionate that fluoride was a bad idea, went to council, went through the motions, like you said, the civic angle, the legal framework to operate in, and got it removed. Got the
Mm.
city to essentially remove this thing. Now, I think that was like 10, almost 20 years ago. Now we're dealing with the health effects from that. But now to reverse that decision, there again is a whole framework that we need to jump through
Mm.
to get it put back in, if it even is possible due to budget or whatever kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting that people need, like you said, right, like the education and the active angle, the actionable angle, sort of go hand in hand. I don't have a clear answer for that one though, whether or not there is a way to sort of synthesize those two things. Maybe there's a
Mm.
way.
Yeah, because it goes down to this idea. It came from the Cold War era, right? It's like the analysis that if you were to run an authoritarian, I can't talk today, authoritarian state, like like the USSR, what you need is like a strong security force, someone who can enforce your will,
Mm,
right? But if you were to run a democracy, what you need is propaganda to make sure people believe in the same kind of things, that they don't diverge, right?
interesting, yeah.
Right. So so the idea of like you need to sell people the same idea so they believe the same idea so they don't diverge. We don't diverge as society. So when you can vote and interact, like you don't get caught up in like divergent things, right?
Mm,
So I think that's one of the interesting things happening right now in society is like mainly Facebooks, but like the social networks have allowed people to diverge by able to
mm.
be by putting people into their natural social bubbles and enforcing more people to get more extreme in what they follow and who they follow, and creating these bubbles, network bubbles. Like people have made people more extremely ionize from each other.
Yeah, I would agree. I think misinformation is definitely one of the greatest challenges democracies face. But like going back to like what Neuvote's been trying to accomplish, it's like I misinformation I think that's like a huge issue that is I don't even know if I have an answer for that, because you go back to like what is the truth, you know? Like what realistically, like, you know, you have to even, if you go down the rabbit hole deep enough, it's like, who is the definer of truth? Is it data? Is it statistics? Is it, you know, who, and then you have to figure out, are those statistics valid? What was the, you know, peer review or empirical process that happened to derive that answer? And yeah, you get deep with it where you're like, where does the truth lie between what you believe and what the rest of society believes, especially when there is a huge divergence? Yeah, I think democracy is being tested as much. You know, it's funny about when we're talking about the internet voting, because I think the internet itself is testing democracy's stress, like it's stress testing democracy more so than anything else right now, because it's before all of this, you had your community, you had your country, you had the, like you said, right, you had sort of this unified media that you know, may have their slant or whatever, but most people read the paper. That's where they got their information from. All that's gone now. You can get your information from literally anywhere, and the internet has kind of opened the door to the free and flowing information. And may, you know, with online voting, open the door to easily accessing the overall system of governance. But what does that mean? Like how do we reconcile what the internet can provide and what the internet can do to the people that are voting? It's a really unique situation. Again, I don't have an answer for misinformation on that one. I think better smarter people will solve that one as best they can.
Yeah, definitely. But getting back into Neuvote, the updates that you've had during this time, you're working with some exciting partners. You know, even during like the when all these lockdowns and you navigate all this stuff and deal with governments now reaching out to you, right? You had to have you've had all those progress, right? So I want to get up to date on that. So let's talk about these partnerships you had and the results of them since you came on.
Yeah, it was interesting because over the last year we had an idea where we wanted to go, but then we tried to, like, when COVID hit, it just became like what we were just talking about, like the civic stuff. We actually thought about that quite deeply. We were working really strongly on trying to combine that stuff. Even the stuff we were just talking about, misinformation, it was like all of the stuff we understood was really difficult, but when COVID hit, it became like we need to get the utility itself out there to provide a service and to, you know, provide what we were intending to do. And basically, we contacted a few partners and said, hey, we understand that this may be difficult, but we're willing to do it and we want to bring you along for this. So I guess I'll kind of back up a bit, because I guess how a lot of this kind of unraveled was in 2019, I traveled to Austria for a conference, an eVote conference. It's where everyone goes to do this, talk about online voting. And a gentleman was there. His name is Dr. Benelo, Dr. Josh Benelo from Microsoft Research. And he's been working on securing election systems since 1987. He's been doing it for like forever. And he doesn't like online voting, or he didn't like online voting very much. He didn't trust it, didn't feel it was good. But what he's produced is a cryptographic algorithm called Election Guard. It's simple terms, it's a homomorphic encryption schema that secures a vote that allows you to check against the vote later on to make sure that it was completely uninterrupted. It's what they call end-to-end verifiability. So you know that that vote that was cast is the same vote that was counted. It's very sophisticated, very amazing product that he's done. And I like the product. I like it. I believe end-to-end verifiability is a really strong component to secure our elections. So I had dinner with him one night, and I said, look, I know you don't like online voting, but here's how we do it. We have a paper system. And because you've developed this for the American in-person paper experience, I think there is a fit there, and I'd like to explore that with you. And he was kind of like, yeah, maybe or whatever. But he toyed with it in his head, and the next day he was presenting to the conference, and he's describing the use cases for Election Guard, and he's like, you can use it in person, you can use it in this type of situation, and then he's like, well, you can theoretically use it for online, maybe, and kind of like looked at me, and I was just like, oh my God, like
Mm.
what a moment, I got this
Yeah, yeah,
this
yeah.
significant academic to at least consider it. That's all I needed. I just needed the consideration. And we kind of left it there, and we talked to Microsoft on and off for the next few months. And when COVID hit, though, I reached out again, and I'm like, okay, look, I know Josh doesn't necessarily like it, but I really want to explore this right now, because if we do produce this online system, there is a need right now. I think I want it to be going, developed hand in hand with Election Guard. And so we set up some calls. We were able to find a significant development team to take on this task. And a few months later, we were literally scoping out the integration between Election Guard and the online voting system, the Neuvote voting system. And we are the first company to integrate that. It was a significant technological challenge because, like, again, this was not built to be ran on an application. It was built for like a machine sitting in an in-person voting booth or something like that to print off a paper receipt, and you kind of take that home and check later. But what we've done is basically take what this Election Guard SDK, integrate it into an application. So now when you cast a vote, every vote secured is you get a digital receipt, an Election Guard receipt that you can then check later on to make sure that your vote was counted. And it was I can't emphasize how good it was to have his head turned and to have this person who typically was very skeptical of online voting, and for good reason, for absolutely good reason, at least take another look and say, you know what, maybe it can be done, and maybe I'm happy to see that like his product is the one kind of coinciding with what we're the Nuvo product that we produced. There was a press release from Microsoft on December 4th in 2020. And in it, they talk about new uses of Election Guard, because it's not just us that has done this. Like, we are the chief, developer for the online component. But Election Guard has now been used in U.S. Democratic Caucus in Congress. Same thing in an online system. So they do their voting. It's not the same way as a secret public election, but they do it in their when they're voting on a measure, or policy, or whatever. And it's interesting. Like, he's developed this system that's so unique, so perfect for what it is, for securing and creating a verifiable trail between a vote and the verifiability component after.
Mm.
And now it's in use more online than it is in the in-person experience, because again, right, COVID has just created the atmosphere for these things to happen. So yeah, that's the Microsoft story. The team, Defending Democracy team at Microsoft, are absolutely amazing. I've never seen anybody so passionate about securing our system. On that note, actually, on top of my head, when we talk about misinformation and sort of the propaganda, I don't know if this is a correct word, but the propaganda aspect of misinformation news cycle right now, that team, they've not just created Election Guard, they actually have created another product, or I think they integrated another product called News Guard,
Mm.
trying to fight in the same thing. So those points you made earlier about misinformation and civic engagement, all that stuff, they sort of just go into like hand in hand with overall democracy as a whole, right? And trying to secure it and make it a little bit better.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, all interesting points. I mean, this is what kind of what I love about you and what you do, right? Because you take the time to like find these experts and verify ideas and concepts. Not a lot of people, not a lot of companies have to do that, or even try to do that.
Mhm.
Most companies we hear about, are creating some SaaS product. They whip together some code, launch it out there, set up a model, and then market it, raise some money, boom, and they keep going. And a lot of capital is tied up in these kind of swift moving SaaS businesses. But
Mm.
with what you're doing, like, you're taking the time to validate, go find people who are the experts in different fields and meld them together, their ideas and the concepts, and making sure this thing's verified from a
Mm.
ground-based community of people who are ingrained in this, right? You got cosigns from the academic community, you got cosigns from cybersecurity professionals, you got even cosigns from people who are like skeptical of online voting, to change their minds and being like, hey, this thing's actually pretty valid. It's interesting.
I'll be honest, man. Getting those people to agree with me is better than any investment capital or anything. Because honestly, like I appreciate your point, and I don't know how. If I guess it's maybe a strength of mine. I will say this though, there are many days where I wish I was a SaaS business throwing together some code and working some model, man. Many times, I will
Hmm.
be quite honest. But the reason why I've done this approach is like what do I know about online voting and these massive changes in our society that will need to occur to get something like this product to market. Yeah, it would be my own hubris if I thought that I had the answers to build a system and just ship it out, off the shelf. Here you go. This is how we're going to do it from now on. I I'm a political geek at heart. I'm a tech geek at heart. So when I hear those experts talk about these new technologies, or not new technologies, but technologies that have been developed on the research side, or these interesting perspectives on how to secure elections as we move forward, I live for that stuff. I revel in it. I've gone to conferences and watched people do talks about completely off the wall ideas that will never be feasible in real life, but that's where their mind is heading. There was one gentleman who talked about uh, hacking an election by sticking microphones underneath the table and then figuring out the sound of the marker on the paper to determine which candidate was being selected using this like off the wall algorithm or something where
Hmm.
it was just insane. Never happened. It will never happen. But this researcher had derived a way to actually statistically prove within a certain margin that you could identify a marking on a ballot simply by listening to these auditory cues. uh, for most people, they would be like, I think even most people in the conference were kind of like, yeah, I'm gonna go get the coffee. But
Hmm.
I walked there, I watched the guy, I was like, my God, like that's a brain, that's a genius,
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
working away on some, yeah, the amount of effort he would have had to pour into this concept was just, you have to appreciate that. And getting into this industry, like my background, cybersecurity or election technology in general, is very limited in scope. I needed to connect with those people to get a wider view of what we were actually doing. And there are people in Canada, for instance, who have spent the majority of their academic career studying this. So for me, these people are typically professors. I feel like a student. Like when I converse with them, they educate me regularly, and I treat it like essentially an extension of university. They tell me like what their perspective is. They cite, they have their citations just like anything else. I eat it all up, and then I pour through whatever they provided to me. Here's a report from 2016 talking about this. It's 200 pages or something. Well, I go read that report so I can understand exactly what they're getting into. It seems kind of weird to think about like digesting all this information, but it will come up. Like all of a sudden, you'll be in a meeting, and somebody will cite some kind of idea that was presented in these reports, and if you're not up to speed with them, it's not like saying like, oh, I don't know. It's like these are deeply technical questions about an industry and a societal procedure that's existed for like hundreds of years. So like there is a lot of work that needs to go into it to fully get the whole scope of how our elections are done and what those elections mean when they move forward to a digital platform.
Hmm.
Yeah,
So yeah, yeah. I mean,
lot to digest, man. Yeah, I love it.
definitely like so. I mean, this is the context of like commercializing academia, right? You can take
I
all
would,
these
yeah,
deep,
yeah, that's a
yeah,
good way to put it. Yeah.
like you take all these deep concepts and like trying to implement it in the real world solutions. That's one of the interesting things of like feeding off of institutions like universities and deep thought leaders.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. So talking about partnerships and moving forward, right? You like you talked alluded a little bit about getting a lot of attention. Can we talk a little bit about what happened in the Latin sphere?
Yeah, well, the first test we ever did with Neuvote when this integration with Election Guard was done. So there are a number of experts, but there's two chief experts in Canada, and one of them is Dr. Nicole Goodman. She's a professor
Mm,
at university. So when the government of Canada wanted to, she's been researching this thing, like I said, for like a really like exceptionally long time, and when the government of Canada wanted to look into this, they commissioned her, or they asked her to write the report. You can read it. It's Online Voting: A Path Forward. It's on Canada.com. It's a great read if you want to get a good. It's not as detailed as I'm talking about. She communicates it way better than I ever could. But yeah, so she had a poli-sci class, and we were talking about testing the system. It's a new system. It's a new way to vote online. So I had the pleasure of working with her and getting some feedback from her students and herself about like what we were doing and how we were approaching this industry. That was like, again, it is a university type situation, but it was like, wow, like you really, you know, it's like performing on stage with Drake or something like that. It's it's crazy, you know. Like I love you. I have these weird ideas of superstars in this space. Like, you know, I get really excited while talking to them. But yeah, right after that occurred, we ended up going down to Brazil, Sao Paulo.
Yeah. Sorry, can we bring this up? Because I did want to talk about that separately. But you know, now that it's up, you know, the idea of being tested. So this university professor and her class, right, did like a cybersecurity almost test of your product, right? Like they deployed it in a closed environment.
It wasn't a cybersecurity test. It was actually like I would say a feature test. Like
test.
How do you how do you feel, like from a poli-sci perspective? How do you feel about the voting process that we're doing? Like the verifiability component. Do you feel comfortable is the satisfactory rate, or do you feel more secure with your vote being counted now that you have a digital receipt provided? And the feedback was great. They really loved it. But also, like, the students pointed out some issues that they saw with it, because it was, again, the first public test. And I told them, we had this big meeting where the students presented their findings, and some of the key points that they made were exceptionally valuable to us. I told them, I said, you know, don't feel like you're talking to the wind right now. I'm going to take these meetings. I have a meeting like literally the next day, and I'm going to bring these up with the development team, and we're going to implement these like right off the bat. And it was great, because you know, you get so close to a project, you kind of lose sight of what other people think about it until it's finally in the open, until you're getting those, you know, Google reviews popping up on your page saying like, this is the problem with it. It was great to have that feedback before we went public, and yeah, no, it's a phenomenal experience.
Yeah, I mean, what's one of the most pivotal moments? One of the most foundational moments of like lean startup methodology, right? It's like validation, making sure you get validation from the people who are actually using your product.
Yeah, exactly.
So that was great validation for you, right? Getting this like this class of like actual professionals being trained on to think about political science and civic engagement, testing it out. Cool. So you get this validation. I know there's I think Manjula got an article out about you guys.
Oh,
CBC.
Yeah. Well, yeah, she was looking into online voting in general. So it's really funny, like that came about because they talked to I think they talked to 3 different vendors, and we were the third one. And if you listen to it was a radio piece, and they're talking about, I think it was titled, "Are we ready for online voting?" So they're talking, and they're like, first 2 vendors were coming on and talking about it. I can't remember what they said. And then there was myself, and I'm like, yeah, you got to use the paper ballot though. Don't do anything but the paper ballot. It's the same thing I say. I feel like a broken record sometimes. And right after, they had one of Canada's critics come on, like an academic critic, and he said, you got to do it with a paper ballot. Like, no, he didn't say it with the paper ballot. He didn't say online voting. He was just like, I only trust paper ballots in my election.
Nice.
Or something. And I'm like, oh yeah, you know, like that's where, again, right, that particular gentleman particularly, we built the system based on his research. So for him to say, like, he's not agreeing with us, he's not endorsing what we're doing. It's I'm endorsing his perspective. He was the one who kind of led me down that path, and I simply developed a system based on his objections to the overall problems that we faced in online voting. You needed to have a paper ballot. So it's interesting how, you know, my messaging has kind of tailored into what they've been saying all along, and then going into what happened in the U.S. It's crazy to see, but the U.S. election was quite literally saved by a paper ballot. I said this to someone else earlier today. If the U.S. system was an online system as we understand it now, where it's just you go on a web page and you vote online, Trump would have had every legitimate reason to object to their election results, and they would have no way to conduct an audit, not a single way. It would have gone to a Supreme Court challenge, and it would have been very interesting to see what would have happened, because there's no audit trail. So for him to say, I don't trust this, even for myself, I'm not saying anything about election interference or manipulation by machines or anything like that. I'm just saying, if they had used a typical online voting system where it's a web page, it goes to a server and the server spits out a result, and somebody said, I don't trust that, I would agree with them. I would be like, okay, yeah, we need to go in a little bit deeper and figure out what happened, because there is literally no way to figure out what actually happened with an online voting system without an audit trail. It's that simple. And when the U.S. was challenged as it was in Georgia, for example, where it really came down to that state, that the whole fate of the United States rested on this one election. They conducted it with the machines. They did, pardon me, an initial check with the machines. They did a second check with the machines, and then they did a hand count, individual hand count of every paper ballot, over 5 million ballots, using thousands of poll workers. It was quite literally to see that level of.
So can you take us on like a journey of what a citizen or what a person would do to vote using Neuvote? Like they go to like, you know, how would it initiate, and how would it like paint a picture for us?
Yeah, it's really easy. You vote on the app. You confirm your selections on a screen to make sure that those are accurate. Once you go to cast your ballot, those selections are encrypted.
Sorry, just slowing that down. So you mentioned paper ballots, right? These paper ballots will be mailed out to your house. You pick them up. Like, how does the paper ballots get involved?
Oh yeah, so the application sits, where a user is, where at their home or what have you, and then there's in a community center or a secure location, there's a remote ballot marking device. So essentially a printer somewhere that's sitting there and has a HD camera attached to it with a little microcomputer. So it's a voting machine, but it's internet connected, but it's only one way internet connected. So when the voter votes, they do everything on their application. At the time of when they're going to cast their ballot, the ballot is encrypted, sent over the network, and immediately connected to that machine. And it's a video feed, just like you and I are talking right now. Just a video feed. They see the printer print off the ballot. It stops, and they can see their ballot as they cast it. They can check their selections, go over it. They can make sure that everything is accurate. And then once they're happy with their result and the ballot has been accurately cast, they sit confirm, and that's it. The vote's over. They receive a little tracking code. They can go back after the election's concluded and confirm that their ballot was accurately counted. So it's like 4 steps. It's super easy.
So what you're basically doing is cutting the time of or the need for someone to go to a voting booth and just manually fill it out.
Yeah, pretty much.
But like everything else is still in place, so it's still paper ballots. So as a person who's voting, you would open up the app on your phone, do some kind of, input your information, verify. I think from what you showed me earlier, you took a picture of your ID, right? And then afterwards, you took a picture of yourself, or like you show it on video, and it is a video verification, just like accessing your phone nowadays using facial recognition. It's matching that goes together, verifies who we do some KYC, AML, make sure you are who you are, and puts you in. And once you're in, just like you see a paper ballot, you see the different options for what you're voting on, right? And you make your selections, press submit, and then you get like a web link to the camera that's in the printer of the nearby voting station, and you can see your ballot print with your information on it and what the selections you made are on it.
Yeah, it's pretty much like that, except we don't use facial recognition. We do a KYC AML, but it's not recognition. Okay. So I have to always make sure that that's communicated. It's like Face ID. We do so the service we use is a liveness detection check. So it's not recognition though, because that is hyper controversial right now. But we use the face as a method to reconcile both who the person is in association with their ID, but then also that they're operating the phone in real time. We don't have to do that. Like, we have a number of different authentication methods, but that's one we prefer because it works. It works really well, and it does the best job of confirming who someone is. But it all happens on the app. It takes like literally seconds. They get connected to the machine. They see their ballot print off. They go, oh, okay, that's exactly as I intended it. They hit confirm. Vote's over. They get a tracking code, and it's all in all, it takes. We have a demo where we slowly move through it, and I think that demo's 2 minutes tops. where that's how long it would take to vote remotely with confirming everything, your information, and then actually casting your ballot.
Mm.
Beautiful process. I love it. I said one time that you could vote. I was in an interview and I said, so easy you could vote in the bathroom or on the toilet or something. As a, I just kind of threw it out there. Then I was like, actually, I don't think I want
Yeah.
to support that idea.
That's a little too visual for
Yeah,
most
yeah,
people.
I know. I had to walk that one back.
But speaking of like the security behind this, right? So if there is meant to be a penetration of this as a system, not only would you have to like falsely identify the person the who's making the vote, you would have to go get past that security, the verification system, and once a vote is made, or like it's even it's interjected there, like the person is still verifying, like so there's somebody who's watching the feed, make sure the printer's printing the right ticket, right?
Yeah, the voter is. So we don't the channel we use, like the video channel, it's end-to-end encrypted as well. So it's like we don't even see what's going on inside that. We can't tell who a voter is voting for, or like what that paper ballot looks like inside of
Yeah.
it. So there's no one like monitoring it. That's another like security feature. But the voter is. So the voter is actually the one monitoring it. So if anything does happen, they can flag an issue. And it's funny. I had a conversation with an engineer, a former CEO. He's like an actual engineer himself, electrical engineer. So he has a pretty good grasp of how this stuff works from like encryption and infrastructure level. And he was like, "Oh, like what if the video feed is fake? That's the only thing I can really think of that would attack this
Mm.
thing." But I mentioned how, I won't say it here, but we have a method for confirming the video feed as authentic. And he was like, ah, yeah, okay. And it's like, essentially, it's a method to provide the voter with assurance that what they're
Yeah.
seeing is actually what they're doing. So it's a very, very unique implementation. In cybersecurity, it's called the clash attack, where
Mm.
you intercept a video feed or an audio feed or something, feed a fake feed back to a voter or a user, and manipulate them to think that they're seeing something. It's like a deep fake pseudo kind of thing, right? But there are methods to kind of secure that. It would be like for you and I, like, how do I know I'm talking to you right now? You know, and there are cues that I can derive. I could ask you a personal question that you give me a response that validates my concerns, that, or not validates my concerns, but communicates to me that I know you're Ravi. I know I'm talking to you in real time, and I'm not talking to a video feed of Ravi asking me questions from like 2 days ago or something like that, So there's lots of different ways to approach that. But it's interesting in the era of deepfakes that is the video real has become something that we need to kind of look at. But it's definitely something we do.
Hmm. Yeah. So that's an extra added layer of security. So you have this now, solve this problem of like, okay, not having to go to the voting booth, make sure it's secured. You got all these experts validating it for you. You got this validation from this university who actually did an active test for you, and you get a call, right, to go into Latin America.
Brazil, yeah,
Brazil.
that was fun. Yeah, they don't mess around. 3 days. They put the submission out, and we had 3 days to respond. So I didn't get the message the first day. I got it the second day, and somebody said, "Hey, they have this thing. If you want to go, you have to contact them right now and submit a proposal." And we had literally 24 hours. So I was like, "Oh, okay." So again, in this industry, sometimes you have to pull all-nighters to get proposals in. There are strict
Mm.
deadlines, and we stayed up all night writing the proposal. I got it sent off, and then we were selected. I had a phone call with the government, or the representative from the election official in Brazil. Don't speak Portuguese at all. I think I know 5 words now, but we had somebody on the call to help us translate, and we were able to go in. Luckily, the gentleman I was speaking with, his English was quite good, and he understood what we were talking about quite well. Yeah, and then they said, okay, you have 30 days to develop a Brazilian voting system, and showcased it down in Sao Paulo. So that was 7 days, 7 day sprints, nonstop with the dev team, getting everything ready, changing all the language into Portuguese. And not only that too, but just like how they vote down there is very unique. So Brazil is actually really interesting because Brazil has done everything electronic. Like
Mhm.
they do electronic voting on the machines since, like, I want to say 1996 or something. Funny enough, actually, they don't trust paper in Brazil because in Brazil taking a ballot box and replacing it with fake ballots is actually something that could potentially happen. Like that's just the reality of Brazil. And you have to kind of build with that in mind. So for them, the verifiability component, having the ability to encrypt your vote and then track it after, was something that they were really interested in seeing. We tried to talk to them about paper, but they simply said like, "No, it's not going to work for us." So we were like, "Well, okay, we have it if you want it, but like we understand your predicament." And yeah, we went down to Brazil. Was not unsatisfied with going down there in November from Canada. Well, the snow's on the ground up here. City is beautiful. Brazil is an amazing place, and working with their election officials at demoing this, again, right? I couldn't ask for a better milestone. Going from Canada's top thought leader in online voting to a country level was within like 30 days was exciting to say the least. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a lot of excitement there, because Brazil is the world's third largest democracy.
That's
It's
right.
two,
Yeah.
it's 270 million people,
Yeah.
right? It's also one of the top 10 economies in the world.
Yeah.
There's a lot of movement happening in Brazil. Brazil is rapidly changing, it's rapidly industrializing, and so let's talk a little about how that came to be, right? So, like how this contact with Brazil happened. They just call you up one day and they're like, "Hey, we need voting systems," right? How does the contact happen?
So Brazil, um, they're actually they have a really interesting thought process when it comes to modernization. So, like Sao Paulo, for instance, is like one of the that's like third biggest city in North America. It's huge. It's like it's metropolis, like bigger than New York, I think. Um, and it's so advanced there. It's one of those places where like you don't go to the store, for example. You order everything, anything and everything, and it's like delivered to your house within minutes. Like COVID has had a significant impact on the city, but it hasn't stopped the commerce of the city from happening at all because everything is digital. Like they don't have Uber Eats there. They have Uber Eats, but they have Uber like a pack of cigarettes from the store, literally. Right, like I need a bottle of water. You just literally 2 seconds later, somebody's driving up on a scooter delivering it to you. It's crazy to see. So hypermodernization is very familiar to Brazil. Cell phones are very endemic there. It's a very unique country, and they had this experiment they wanted to run. Well, like a demo for elections called the Future of Elections. I think it was a little bit different in Portuguese, but they basically they feel that their election systems could use an update, and they had some controversial political stuff going on over the last decade or so. So they have a very unique governmental structure in Brazil because of the military dictatorship that happened there. So the election system or the election officials, or I guess it's called the Tribunal, Superior Tribunal of Justice or Elections or something, but it's part or under the umbrella of the Justice Department for Brazil. So they see essentially elections as under the umbrella of justice as a whole to represent the people of Brazil. So it's really interesting how they're really future proofing their elections even way ahead of the curve. Like the U.S. went to vote by mail for their elections. Brazil was like, we're not even going to touch vote by mail. Let's just take that leap right to online and see what's available out there. So they had a number of vendors go down and demo. We were the only ones that were doing it our particular way. There was some interesting stuff. IBM did a blockchain play. It was okay. If anyone from IBM is watching it, no offense, it was okay. People were great. Don't get me wrong, but I didn't really. It wasn't a showstopper or anything, and we don't really agree with blockchain voting in general. To be honest with you, we think there's a number of issues with it. Some companies really just kind of threw something together last minute and we're just trying to capitalize on it. But there were a few companies that really went down there with a substantial offering, and we're trying to actually make it happen down there. We were one of those companies for sure. So it was we worked hand in hand with Microsoft on that opportunity. So it was great. I couldn't have asked the gentleman who was my host down there was fantastic, and yeah, it was really interesting to see how people were receiving this particular technology in Brazil, um, for one, Brazil has a exceptionally wide inequality gap between the
Yeah.
rich and the poor. So it's like people who were high income were coming down to vote on it, but then people who quite literally are just unfamiliar with technology in general and had to kind of be like handheld through the process were also using it. So it was really interesting to see how they were engaging with it and using the service.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, that's also one of the issues too, right? Like the people who get left behind in any kind of system. The system doesn't represent them because they're not involved with the system,
Mm.
right? So to kind of wrap up, um, you had a lot of advancements during this time. A lot of attention, a lot of validation, and a lot of people reach out to you. What's next for you? Like, what is it? What is 2021 going to bring Nuvo?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think my perspective anyway, and this is I think how a lot of election officials are feeling. Unfortunately, COVID, we are facing the issue that this may not be something that just kind of disappears in a few months at this point, and we do need to prepare in advance for that. So we do have elections coming up in a few years from now, 2022 and 2023, both in Canada and the U.S. What do we do? What realistically, what do we do? Like you mentioned, the stuff in Brazil, they have an election coming up in 2 years. They're already getting prepared for it because for them, a burden on their healthcare is way more significant than it would be for Canada and the U.S. Their infrastructure needs are much greater in those countries than they are here. So uh, what we're seeing is people are starting to pay attention and get prepared. And think about this like really carefully about what this means to roll it out. This isn't like a COVID play where it's like, hey, we're all going to go online voting for COVID, and then when it's done, we're going to go back to the way things were. People are considering this as a shift in how we operate. Um, Implementing, what does it mean? Like those questions you were posing early on in the conversation. What does this mean now for democracy? What does it mean for civic engagement? What does it mean for society in general when all of a sudden engaging in voting on measures is as simple as voting on your phone or something like that now? So we've seen a lot of interest. I think I will say, in my opinion, I think there's a good chance provinces, a few states, and maybe a couple federal governments are going to be implementing online voting very soon, like at a high level. And then I think, from that, it's just gonna, it's trends. Other countries are gonna kind of follow suit and go from there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's gonna be really exciting to see, right? Definitely a modernization of an older system, but
Mm,
one thing I also want to do is like also give light to the fact that you're working with some great partners, right?
mm.
You talked a bit about the university partners and the academics that helped out. There's a lot of commercial partners helping out as well. You mentioned Microsoft and their help. Working closely with them and their team. Xerox, with the printers, right? Being able to
Oh yeah, I
partner
forgot
with.
to throw them in there. Sorry, Xerox. Xerox has been phenomenal. Yeah, we're using Xerox printers just from the security play too. Absolutely
Yeah.
great. Absolutely great. Great company. It's been a pleasure to work with them as well. We're really trying to bring an enterprise solution. But it's not just that though. We're again, right, for something like this, we're trying to fill in the gaps as much as we can. So it's like Xerox, Microsoft. We're working with another company on like the civic stuff and exploring that angle as well. Even how we're raising capital, right? Like we started talking to a company called Front Funder for crowdfunding, and a lot of people were like, oh, what, crowdfunding, like what are you doing with that? But we felt, especially considering we're sort of like a public-facing company, even though we're not like a public company. Um, we kind of worked with them because we felt that a portion of the capital we are raising should be derived from just regular people, and we also wanted to engage with regular people and get their feedback as to what we're doing. It's one thing to pitch to an investor; it's another to actually pitch to somebody who has a vested stake in using your service down the road. And the experience has been really great. Yeah, it's been a really interesting experience going through that crowdfunding portal.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I'm really excited about Front Founder and your campaign with them, I know Front Founder pretty well. Will Tang is an old friend. I just had a call with them today to catch
Mm,
up. Will, when I actually started BlueMax, I actually met with Will. to actually consult with him on how I should move forward and how we can help companies together. He's really an insightful person, and for him to be behind Front Founder, to me, just spoke volumes to what his vision is and how he's implementing it through Front Founder. Right. What I love about Front Founder is that it allows the democratization of the equity play, right? Of people who can now fund and be part of companies. When you're an angel, like angel investing, like early stage startup investing, the people who really invest in this, they are not investing in a company per se. They're investing not on like financials or like projections. They're investing the future that the company is building, right? What is the problem the company is building, and what is the solution, and what can the future be with this solution in the market, right? So a lot of people like before a Front Founder, before the crowd equity raising, generally you want the only angels who can put in like 30,000, $50,000 above. They got to be accredited investors, have a certain net worth. So it kind of limits a company from one who can support them, who can grow, who can fund them, and also limits people who actually want to help companies and who are experiencing pain points. So the Front Founder, like you can put in a micro sum and support things you care about. And what I'm hoping here is, and I've seen, I've seen your campaign. It's been running for a few days now, and organically, out of organic reach, people have been coming out, seeing your vision, seeing your information, and saying, hey, this is the kind of future I want to buy into, right? One where I can vote more efficiently and clearly, but everyone also can too, right? I made this comment about it on about you guys on LinkedIn, right? When I say, I'm like, how do you save democracy, right? You digitize it, and you make it more, more efficient, more ethereal, more transparent. And so kudos to you. Using Front Founder makes you more transparent. It allows people to democratize and support you in a more holistic way, right? How's that experience been for you with Front Founder?
It's interesting because it's a very strict process to get spun up there. It's no joke. Like there's a lot of regulatory compliance you have to go through to even use the service in general. It is a new way to kind of get engaged with it. We kept it pretty. We leave it kind of just running. It's a good way to sort of leave raising capital without having to daily engage. But it is like a full-time job in and of itself. I think generally all capital raising is. My favorite part about Front Funder is though the random people, just the random people, not angels, not VCs, not typical institutional investors, people who are just interested in what you're doing, asking you questions. So the other day, I had a gentleman reach out to me from Front Funder on LinkedIn, and he said, "Hey, I'm interested. I have some concerns. I have some questions. I want to talk to you about it." He sent me like 3 or 4 messages. He just identified his questions, and he wanted a direct answer. So I got back to him. I said, here's the response. It was big, chunk posts on LinkedIn messaging, and he got back to me the next morning. He's like, "That's exactly what I wanted to hear." Like it was like. How do you plan on taking this? And like, how do you plan on rolling this product out across these different communities? And I answered him. I'm like, here's the vision. Like here's just from the CEO's mouth here, And this isn't like, why did you price your service in this way or whatever? Like it's just so candid. Like, hey, there's a community here I heard about. How would you go in and do this community? How would you go in and create the service for this community? And I'm like, here's how I would do it. I considered it for a few hours and spit out a strategy to him. And he's like, that's exactly what I wanted to hear, because he lives in that community. That's what he wants to do. It's what he wants to get engaged in. And so it was really unique to have just a question you would never hear in a board meeting or a VC meeting or something like that, where they're probing all your business acumen. This was just generally like a completely new way of thinking about how you as a CEO thinks about your business. So it's really interesting to get that sort of feedback, like direct feedback. It goes back to that thing I did with Nicole's class. It wasn't a public penetration test by some agency or something like that. It was poli-sci students, people that are going to challenge the methodology, the thought process of your product, asking you questions. I remember I talked to Nicole after we did a Q&A, and I swear to God, I've never been more nervous coming out of a session, a Q&A session, than I did her class, because I was not expecting the questions they asked. It was completely took you completely off guard. It
Yeah.
was like you have a presupposition of what you think is going to be asked, and it's like talking to you or talking to someone who's a little bit familiar with technology. You get into a meeting with an cryptographer, they're going to be like, what are you using? How are you doing this, right? You get into a class with a bunch of poli-sci students. It's like,
Mhm.
how does your app support marginalized communities? And you're like, whoa, great question. Here's what I think, and then they'll retort back with their perspective, and all of a sudden you're like, uh, I never thought about how women voting from a woman's shelter would be impacted by this particular. So it just like blows your mind. Same thing with front. A woman's shelter would be impacted by this particular. So it just like blows your mind. Same thing with Front Funder. It's like you get these questions asked by regular people who have a vested interest in supporting your dream, but also using your service in general. And how you view that product through that lens is been exceptionally eye-opening.
Yeah, and I love that so much because like it's like real people asking real questions, supporting you for it. I've seen your campaign. I think as of today, you've raised about $45,000 from that campaign, Front Funder
Hmm.
campaign, and a lot of these people are putting in $500, $2,000 towards it.
Hmm.
To close this up, like from episode 7 when you came on and you first talked about how you thought about this idea, being in middle school, being at a party,
Hmm.
and all these people were like voting by phone for America's was it America's top talent, American
American
Idol,
Idol. American
American
Idol.
Idol, right?
Showing my age there, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But like I remember those days. Like technically that was the first time anyone did any kind of online voting, right? You're texting in live on air and people getting voted in, and it was a very engaging kind of experience. And
Hmm.
you were talking about how you thought it was like, hey, these people are so engaged. If only we made voting like this, like
Hmm.
more instantaneous, more direct, and made it so easy that you can just participate very quickly with very little energy, more people will be involved, right? And
Hmm.
from middle school, you initial thinking about it, digesting in you, getting better, bigger and bigger until now you're working on it. And to this day now, episode 112,
Hmm.
you're here right now with all these updates working on this. And that's quite a journey, you know? And what I'm really excited about is being
Hmm.
part of this and seeing how much more you progress this.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Ravi. It's been amazing. I know we've kept in touch a little bit over the last, year and a half or so, whatever. But yeah, man, it, going back a year ago, it's weird being like, I wouldn't recognize the person that I was dealing with a year ago. I was w- uh, wondering how we were ever going to get this thing done. Incremental, like you said at the beginning, incremental steps. Now I'm like, I, I I can't even, it's not even exact. I literally wake up every day and I'm just like, okay, what's going to happen now? Like literally what's going to happen now? And I'll without fail something during the day, whether it's and it's like 7 days a week nonstop. Like the last 2 weekends, for example, Saturday and Sunday, I've literally got phone calls and been like, hey, this is going on right now. We got to get, and I'm just, oh, okay, good. And it's, there's no rest. There is literally no rest in this particular thing right now. I do feel immensely blessed for that though too.
Yeah.
A lot of industries have been really impacted by COVID. Um, we're working as hard as we can to produce a valuable service that society, I guess, is kind of open of a need for right now. But at the same time, oh man, yeah, it's tech during COVID, man. It's breakneck speed. The good thing is we're all stuck at home. Can't do much except for work anyway. So yeah, but yeah, it's yeah, I think we'll do an update in about a year from now, and I hope that the update is like, oh man, I downloaded your app. I just registered to vote on Neuvote or something like that.
Yeah.
I would put a good amount of money that that's probably what's going to happen. To be honest with you.
I'm looking forward to that, man. I'm
Yeah.
really looking forward to that. That'll be really cool to see, really cool to engage with. Wish you all the best, and thank you again,
It's always a
guys.
pleasure, Ravi.
Yeah, episode 112. See you, man.
Peace, man. Have a good day.